Welcome to Willow Creek, a seemingly peaceful small town harboring a dark secret. 10-year-old Ethan doesn't see the future, but he feels the cold residue of impending death, accompanied by malevolent whispers. As a series of accidents claim the lives of residents, Ethan realizes an unseen hand is at play. Can he decipher these chilling residues? Find the hidden killer before darkness engulfs Willow Creek? Join Ethan's perilous journey, where his strange senses are the last hope to uncover the truth. Don't forget to like and follow for every twist and turn. Chapter 1: The Frozen Touch. Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, often felt like a place where time moved at the languid pace of the creek that gave it its name. But beneath the surface of its familiar tranquility, a discordant note had begun to resonate, a chilling anomaly that only 10-year-old Ethan could perceive. Ethan wasn't a seer of crystal balls and spectral visions. Instead, the imminence of death or violence registered within him as a sudden, bone-deep coldness, an invisible frost that seemed to cling to the air. This icy premonition was frequently accompanied by fleeting sensory impressions, a snatch of a sound, a momentary image, and, most disturbingly, a faint, raspy whisper that slithered into the quiet corners of his mind. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the setting sun painted the familiar clapboard houses in hues of orange and gold, Ethan sat on the porch steps, absently kicking at a loose stone. A sudden, sharp drop in temperature enveloped him, raising goosebumps on his arms despite the mild air. Simultaneously, a fragmented image flickered behind his eyelids. A flash of silver, the muffled thud of something heavy falling, and a sharp intake of breath. The raspy whisper followed, a barely audible yet undeniably sinister intrusion. "End it, now." Ethan's small frame stiffened. He scanned the peaceful street, his eyes searching for the source of the sudden dread. A dog barked in the distance, leaves swirled in a gentle gust of wind, and old Mr. Abernathy tended his prize-winning roses next door. Everything appeared normal, yet the coldness persisted, and the chilling whisper echoed in the hollow of his thoughts. The following morning, a somber stillness fell over Willow Creek. News spread quickly. Mrs. Gable, the kind-hearted owner of the town's bakery, had been found dead in her kitchen. The official report cited a tragic accident involving a faulty appliance. Ethan listened to the hushed conversations at school, a cold dread solidifying in his stomach. The flash of silver, the heavy thud, the sharp intake of breath, they eerily mirrored the news. But the whisper, the chilling command, that was a layer of darkness no one else seemed to acknowledge. Days later, the familiar icy touch returned, more intense this time. The fragmented impressions were clearer, sharper. The rhythmic whir of a saw blade, a sudden crimson spray against wood, and a strangled cry. The raspy whisper hissed with a furious urgency, "Silence, for good." By the weekend, Mr. Peterson, the affable owner of the hardware store, was found dead in his workshop. The cause was ruled a horrific accident with his power saw. Two unexpected deaths in such rapid succession cast a pall of unease over Willow Creek. People spoke of bad luck, of the fragility of life. But in the quiet of his own mind, Ethan felt the chilling echo, the residue of a deliberate act clinging to these events. The raspy whisper, the undercurrent of malice, these weren't accidents. As the coldness began to coalesce around Reverend Miller, accompanied by the disturbing image of dark, still water and a desperate, flailing motion, the raspy whisper carrying a chilling finality, under "Let him sleep," a stark realization dawned in Ethan's young mind. This wasn't just a premonition of misfortune. This felt like the deliberate snuffing out of a life. He had to find someone who would understand the frozen touch, the chilling whispers, the darkness that was beginning to consume Willow Creek. Chapter 2: The Frozen Warning. The disquiet in Willow Creek thickened with each inexplicable death. The townsfolk whispered about bad luck, but a subtle unease began to permeate their conversations, a sense that something was fundamentally wrong in their peaceful haven. For Ethan, the chilling echoes of Mrs. Gable and Mr. Peterson lingered like a persistent frost, a constant reminder of the deliberate malice he had sensed. The frozen touch surrounding Reverend Miller was different, however. It lacked the frantic energy he had felt before. Instead, it was a cold, stagnant stillness, accompanied by the disturbing image of the lake's dark surface and a feeling of something being forcibly held beneath. The raspy whisper was quieter this time, almost a satisfied murmur, "Peace at last, no more words." Ethan's fear for Reverend Miller intensified. The pastor often sought solace by the lake on Sunday afternoons. The cold stillness, the image of submersion, the chilling finality of the whisper, it felt intentional, predatory. He had to try again to make someone understand. He found Sheriff Brody at the town's annual bake sale, the sheriff's usually jovial face creased with a weary concern as he accepted a slice of apple pie. Ethan tugged on his sleeve. "Sheriff Brody," Ethan said, his voice barely audible above the cheerful chatter, "it's not accidents." Sheriff Brody knelt down, his pie plate balanced precariously in one hand. "Ethan, we talked about this. Those were tragic events, but the evidence points to accidents." "No," Ethan insisted, his small hands clenching into fists. "I feel it. It's cold. And the voice, it says things. About Reverend Miller, it's going to happen at the lake. It's not an accident." Sheriff Brody sighed, his gaze softening with a mixture of sympathy and resignation. "Ethan, I know you're a sensitive boy, and these events have been upsetting for everyone. But we can't just go around accusing people without any proof." Desperate, Ethan sought out Mrs. Albright at the library. The comforting scent of old books usually calmed his frayed nerves, but today, it offered little solace. He recounted the chilling stillness he had sensed around Reverend Miller, the image of the dark water, the whisper of finality. Mrs. Albright listened intently, her brow furrowed with a deep concern that mirrored Ethan's own fear. "Ethan," she said slowly, her voice grave, "what you're describing, it's more than just a feeling of something bad happening. It sounds like you're sensing a deliberate act. Someone wants to hurt him?" Ethan whispered, a shiver tracing its way down his spine. "It's possible," Mrs. Albright replied, her gaze distant as she stared at the rows of silent books. "If that's the case, then we're no longer dealing with misfortune. We're dealing with malice." A cold dread settled over Ethan. The thought of someone intentionally causing these deaths in their quiet town was terrifying. And he was the only one who seemed to perceive the icy tendrils of their intent. He and Mrs. Albright exchanged a worried glance, a silent acknowledgement of the unseen darkness that was beginning to envelop Willow Creek. They knew they had to find a way to understand the frozen warnings that haunted Ethan's mind before the chilling echo heralded another tragedy. Chapter 3: The Frozen Thread. Ethan and Mrs. Albright sat at a small table in the quiet corner of the library, surrounded by towering shelves of silent witnesses. The comforting scent of aged paper did little to thaw the icy dread that clung to Ethan. He recounted the fragmented sensations, the chilling whispers, trying to articulate the subtle differences in the frozen touch surrounding each victim. "With Mrs. Gable," Ethan said softly, tracing patterns on the wooden tabletop, "it felt sudden, like a quick, sharp coldness, and the whisper was almost a command." "And Mr. Peterson?" Mrs. Albright prompted, her gaze steady and attentive. "Angry," Ethan replied, a shiver running down his spine. The coldness was sharp, like ice shards, and the whisper, it was full of rage. "And Reverend Miller?" Ethan hesitated, a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. "Still, so cold, like the lake in winter. And the whisper, it felt final, like something being put to rest, forever. Mrs. Albright steepled her fingers, her brow furrowed in thought. These aren't just random feelings, Ethan. You're sensing something specific, a distinct intent behind each event. The frozen touch, it's like a residue of their final moments, tainted by the killer's presence. They began to look for connections between the victims. Mrs. Gable had been a long-time member of Reverend Miller's congregation. Mr. Peterson occasionally did odd jobs for both Mrs. Gable and the church. The connections were tenuous, the kind that linked many people in a small town. The whispers, Mrs. Albright said slowly, tapping a finger on a notepad. Are there any recurring words? Any specific phrases besides the general intent? Ethan concentrated, closing his eyes, trying to recall the chilling fragments. With Mrs. Gable. Now, and with Mr. Peterson? Silence. Nuisance. With Reverend Miller. No more words. The words themselves seemed disparate, offering no clear link. But the underlying tone, the chilling finality, was consistent. It's like the killer has a different reason for each one, Ethan murmured, a growing unease settling in his stomach. Or perhaps, Mrs. Albright countered, her gaze thoughtful, the same reason expressed differently in their final moments. Think, Ethan. Was there anything else? Any images that repeated? Any specific locations tied to the whispers? Ethan strained his memory. The teacup in Mrs. Gable's case, the power saw with Mr. Peterson, the dark water of the lake with Reverend Miller. Each was tied to their deaths, but offered no clear link to a perpetrator. What if the coldness isn't just a feeling? Ethan asked suddenly. What if it's a trace? Like a fingerprint, but colder? Mrs. Albright's eyes widened slightly. A psychic residue? It's a possibility, Ethan. If so, you're sensing the killer's presence at the moment of their act. The thought was both terrifying and illuminating. If Ethan could sense this frozen thread, this chilling signature of the killer, perhaps they could use it. Perhaps Ethan could focus his ability, try to sense where this coldness had been strongest, where it might appear again. The library, usually a sanctuary of stories, had become a silent war room, two unlikely detectives piecing together the chilling fragments of a deadly puzzle. The quiet of Willow Creek held a darkness they were only beginning to understand. Chapter 4: The Lingering Frost. Driven by the chilling possibility that the frozen touch was a psychic residue of the killer's presence, Ethan began to focus his unusual ability. He tried to recall the specific locations where the coldness had been most intense, the places where the raspy whispers had echoed loudest in his mind. With Mrs. Gable, the coldness had seemed strongest in his mind's image of her kitchen. With Mr. Peterson, it was the enclosed space of his workshop, thick with the scent of sawdust. With Reverend Miller, it was the dark, still surface of the lake. These locations, while tied to the victims' deaths, offered no immediate connection to a single perpetrator. However, Ethan started to pay closer attention to the lingering feeling of coldness after each event. It wasn't a physical cold, but a persistent psychic chill that seemed to cling to certain places. He noticed a faint, almost imperceptible coldness near Mrs. Gable's now-shuttered bakery, a slightly stronger sensation around Mr. Peterson's locked-up hardware store, and a palpable, unsettling frost near the edge of the lake where Reverend Miller had drowned. He shared this observation with Mrs. Albright. "It's still there," he said, his voice hushed. "The coldness. Not as strong as before, but it's like a shadow." Mrs. Albright nodded thoughtfully. "A residual energy. It makes sense, Ethan. If you're sensing a psychic imprint, it might linger in the places where the acts occurred." They discussed the possibility of using this lingering frost to identify the killer. Could Ethan sense where the coldness was strongest before an event? Could he use it to anticipate the killer's next move? The idea was daunting, relying on a sense that was both fragile and terrifyingly accurate. Ethan began to consciously scan the town, focusing his mind, trying to detect any area that felt particularly cold, any place where the psychic frost seemed to be gathering. It was a disorienting process, a constant battle against the normal sensory input of the world around him. Days turned into a tense week. Ethan walked through Willow Creek, not seeing the familiar sights, but feeling for the subtle chill in the air, listening for the faintest echo of the raspy whisper. He spent time near places frequented by the victims, trying to understand if the lingering frost held any clues about their connections or the killer's habits. He noticed a faint, almost imperceptible coldness around the small community garden where Mrs. Gable sometimes volunteered. He felt a slightly stronger chill near the hardware store where Mr. Peterson often chatted with townsfolk. And the area around the lake where Reverend Miller had found peace now held the most profound, unsettling frost. Then one afternoon, while walking past the town hall, a new sensation washed over Ethan. It wasn't the sharp, immediate coldness of an impending event, but a different kind of chill, a stagnant, almost buried frost clinging to the building's entrance. It was fainter than the residue near the lake, but distinctly present. And with it came a fleeting image, a hand clutching a ledger, and the raspy whisper, almost a murmur, "Balance the accounts, one way or another." Ethan stopped dead in his tracks, a cold dread gripping his heart. The town hall. Ledgers. Balancing accounts. It was a different kind of intent than he had sensed before, not the immediate taking of a life, but something more calculated, more bureaucratic. And the lingering frost on the town hall felt different, older, as if the killer had been there before, perhaps even recently. A new, chilling thread had emerged from the frozen tapestry of Willow Creek's secrets. Chapter 5: The Ledger's Chill. The stagnant frost clinging to the town hall entrance sent a new wave of unease through Ethan. The image of the ledger and the whispered words about balancing accounts felt different from the raw malice he had sensed before. This was colder, more calculated, suggesting a motive beyond simple rage or a desire for silence. He rushed to the library, his mind racing, and recounted his experience to Mrs. Albright. "The town hall," he said breathlessly, "feels cold there. Not like when someone is about to die, but old cold. And I saw a ledger." Mrs. Albright's eyes widened, a flicker of understanding in their depths. Balancing accounts, that could imply finances, records, someone with access to official documents. They began to brainstorm, trying to connect the victims to the town hall. Mrs. Gable had occasionally donated baked goods for town events. Mr. Peterson supplied hardware for various municipal projects. Reverend Miller was involved in community initiatives that often required town hall approval. The connections were still tenuous, but the focus had shifted. "The lingering frost," Mrs. Albright mused, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "If it's a residue of the killer's presence, then they must have been at the town hall recently, perhaps even regularly." They decided to investigate further. The next day, Ethan and Mrs. Albright visited the town hall under the guise of Ethan researching a school project on local government. Ethan focused his senses, trying to detect the strongest areas of the lingering frost. It seemed concentrated around the records office and the treasurer's office. As they browsed the public areas, Ethan subtly observed the people working there. A harried clerk, a quiet archivist, and the stern-faced town treasurer, Mr. Davies. Ethan tried to sense the coldness around each of them, but the residual frost of the building itself made it difficult to discern anything specific. Later, Mrs. Albright, using her librarian skills, managed to access some old town records. They looked for any unusual transactions, any discrepancies that might suggest a motive for balancing accounts. The records were meticulous, offering no immediate red flags. However, Mrs. Albright noticed something else. All three victims, Mrs. Gable, Mr. Peterson, and Reverend Miller, had recently signed a petition objecting to a proposed zoning change that would have benefited a local developer, a man known for his ruthless business practices and his frequent dealings with the town hall. The developer's name was Arthur Jenkins. A chill, different from the psychic residue, ran down Ethan's spine. Arthur Jenkins. He had seen him arguing heatedly with Reverend Miller just days before the pastor's death. Could the balancing of accounts refer to silencing those who opposed Jenkins's plans? That evening, Ethan experienced another fleeting echo, this time clearer and more focused. He saw a hand slamming a heavy book shut, the glint of a gold ring on the finger, and a raspy whisper, laced with satisfaction, "One less obstacle, the path is clear." Ethan didn't recognize the book, but the glint of the gold ring was distinct. He had seen Mr. Davies, the town treasurer, wearing a similar ring. The pieces began to fall into place, casting a long, chilling shadow over the seemingly innocuous town hall. The ledger's chill was beginning to point towards a suspect within their own local government. Chapter 6: The Treasurer's Shadow. The connection to Arthur Jenkins and the distinct gold ring on a hand slamming a ledger shut cast a long shadow of suspicion over Mr. Davies, the town treasurer. Ethan and Mrs. Albright knew they had to proceed cautiously. Accusing a respected town official based on a child's unusual senses and a fragmented vision was a precarious proposition. They began to observe Mr. Davies discreetly. Ethan, under the guise of helping Mrs. Albright with library errands, would often linger near the town hall, focusing his senses. The lingering frost around the building remained, strongest near the treasurer's office, but Ethan couldn't detect the sharper coldness that preceded the deaths. Mrs. Albright, meanwhile, delved deeper into town records. She meticulously reviewed financial transactions, looking for any irregularities or connections between Mr. Davies, the victims, and Arthur Jenkins. The records were frustratingly clean, offering no immediate proof of wrongdoing. However, Mrs. Albright noticed a pattern. In the weeks leading up to each death, there had been specific requests for information or access to certain town documents by Mr. Davies, often related to zoning regulations and financial reports concerning the proposed development. These requests, while seemingly routine, now took on a more sinister hue. Ethan experienced another fleeting echo while near the town hall. This time, it was a close-up image of a hand wiping something clean, the glint of the gold ring prominent, and the raspy whisper, laced with a chilling efficiency, "No trace, keep it clean." The image was disturbing, suggesting an attempt to conceal evidence. They discussed their findings. The zoning petition provided a potential motive for Arthur Jenkins, and Mr. Davies's access to records and the gold ring linked him to Ethan's echo. The cleaning image suggested a meticulousness that fit the treasurer's personality. "We need more," Mrs. Albright said, her voice low. "We have suspicion, but no proof. And accusing Mr. Davies without solid evidence could be dangerous." They decided to focus on finding a more concrete link. Mrs. Albright remembered that the zoning petition, while public record, had individual signature sheets stored in the town clerk's office, which was adjacent to the treasurer's. Perhaps there was something on those original documents, something Mr. Davies might have touched or altered. The next day, under the pretense of needing to verify a signature for his school project, Ethan accompanied Mrs. Albright to the town clerk's office. While Mrs. Albright spoke with the clerk, Ethan focused his senses on the area. He detected a faint, lingering coldness around the filing cabinets where older documents were stored, a coldness that felt subtly different from the general frost of the building. As the clerk retrieved the petition signature sheets, Ethan subtly brushed his hand against the cabinet. A faint, almost imperceptible echo flickered in his mind, the rustle of paper, the faint scent of a specific type of hand lotion he had noticed Mr. Davies using, and the almost silent whisper, "Make sure they agree, no dissent." It was a small detail, but it was a direct link. The hand lotion, the location of the petition, and the controlling tone of the whisper solidified their suspicion. Mr. Davies wasn't just a meticulous treasurer, he was actively silencing opposition to Arthur Jenkins's development plans. The ledger's chill had finally led them to a specific individual lurking in the heart of Willow Creek's trusted institutions. The game had become much more dangerous. Chapter 7: The Clerk's Unease. The faint scent of almond hand lotion lingering near the zoning petition filing cabinet was a small but significant piece of the puzzle. It placed Mr. Davies directly at the scene of potential manipulation, reinforcing Ethan's echoes of control and silence dissent. Ethan and Mrs. Albright knew they had to tread carefully. Directly accusing the town treasurer based on their limited evidence and Ethan's unusual ability was too risky. They decided their next step was to subtly investigate the town clerk, Mrs. Peterson, no relation to the deceased hardware store owner. She was responsible for maintaining the town records, including the zoning petitions. Perhaps she had noticed something amiss, some unusual activity around the documents. The following day, Mrs. Albright visited the town clerk's office alone, feigning interest in researching the history of zoning regulations in Willow Creek. She engaged Mrs. Peterson in casual conversation, subtly steering the topic towards the recent petition and any unusual requests for access to the files. Mrs. Peterson was a kind but somewhat flustered woman. She recalled Mr. Davies being particularly insistent about reviewing the original signature sheets a few weeks prior, claiming he needed to verify some information for a council meeting. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, in light of recent events and Mrs. Albright's seemingly innocent inquiries, a flicker of unease crossed her face. "Mr. Davies was quite particular," Mrs. Peterson said, adjusting her glasses nervously. "He usually just asks for summaries. But he wanted to see the original sheets, the ones with everyone's actual signatures." Mrs. Albright pressed gently, "Did he mention why?" "Something about ensuring accuracy, I believe," Mrs. Peterson replied, but her tone lacked conviction. "He was in the records room for quite a while." This information corroborated Ethan's echo of the rustling paper and the whisper about ensuring agreement. It suggested Mr. Davies might have been tampering with the petition, perhaps marking or altering the signatures of those who opposed the zoning change. Later that day, Ethan experienced another brief echo, this time more visual than auditory. He saw a fleeting image of Mr. Davies's hand, the gold ring prominent, pressing down hard on a piece of paper, as if obscuring something. A faint whisper followed, "Make it disappear." The image was disturbing. Combined with Mrs. Peterson's unease about Mr. Davies's handling of the petition, it painted a picture of deliberate manipulation and concealment. They now had a potential motive and a clearer link to Mr. Davies's actions surrounding the zoning vote. Ethan and Mrs. Albright knew they couldn't go directly to Sheriff Brody with their suspicions based solely on Ethan's abilities and circumstantial evidence. They needed something more concrete to convince him that the accidents were, in fact, carefully orchestrated murders tied to the contentious zoning development. The clerk's unease and the potential tampering with the petition offered a new avenue of investigation, a tangible thread they could potentially follow to unravel the truth behind the frozen touch that haunted Willow Creek. Chapter 8: The Altered Signatures. Armed with Mrs. Peterson's unease and Ethan's unsettling vision of Mr. Davies obscuring something on paper, Ethan and Mrs. Albright knew they had to examine the original zoning petition signature sheets again. They needed concrete evidence, something tangible that would corroborate Ethan's echoes and Mrs. Peterson's hesitant suspicions. The next day, Ethan feigned another need for research related to local government. and Mrs. Albright accompanied him back to the town clerk's office. This time, Mrs. Albright engaged Mrs. Peterson in a longer conversation, focusing on the procedural details of handling important documents like the zoning petition. She subtly inquired about the security measures and whether anyone had expressed unusual interest in the original sheets. Mrs. Peterson, now visibly more troubled, admitted that Mr. Davies's intense focus on the original signatures had struck her as odd, but she hadn't wanted to question a senior town official. She also mentioned that after Mr. Davies had reviewed them, she had simply refiled them without a thorough check. While Mrs. Albright kept Mrs. Peterson occupied, Ethan, feigning a dropped pencil, subtly maneuvered near the filing cabinets. He focused his senses, the faint coldness near the petition files now carrying a subtle undercurrent of manipulation. He reached out, his fingertips brushing against the edge of the folder containing the signature sheets. A faint echo flickered, the scraping sound of something being erased, a faint smudge on the paper, and the almost whispered words, "No record, clean slate." Ethan signaled to Mrs. Albright, and they made their excuses to leave, their minds buzzing with this new information. The erasing and clean slate whispers, combined with Mrs. Peterson's account and Ethan's visual echo, strongly suggested that Mr. Davies had tampered with the petition, likely altering or removing the signatures of those who opposed the zoning change. They knew they had to see those original signature sheets again, this time with a more discerning eye. Mrs. Albright, using her authority as a respected member of the community, arranged another meeting with Mrs. Peterson, explaining that she needed to verify some historical data related to the petition for a local archive project. This time, with Mrs. Peterson's slightly more cooperative demeanor, Mrs. Albright carefully examined the signature sheets. Under the guise of meticulous note-taking, she scrutinized each signature, looking for any signs of erasure, overwriting, or inconsistencies in the ink. It took time and careful observation, but eventually, Mrs. Albright found them. On several of the signature lines belonging to Mrs. Gable, Mr. Peterson, and she now realized with a sickening lurch, Reverend Miller, there were faint smudges, almost invisible to the untrained eye. Under a strong magnifying glass that Mrs. Albright had discreetly brought, they could see the telltale signs of erasure. Someone had tried to remove their signatures. The "no record, clean slate" whisper now made chilling sense. Mr. Davies wasn't just silencing dissent, he was trying to erase any record of it, likely to push through Arthur Jenkins's zoning change without opposition. The motive was becoming clearer: power, profit, and the elimination of anyone who stood in their way. The frozen thread had led them to tangible proof of a conspiracy, and the chilling echoes now resonated with a horrifying clarity. They had to find a way to bring this evidence to light before the cold touch claimed another victim. Chapter 9: The Unfrozen Truth. The faint smudges on the zoning petition, almost invisible to the naked eye, were the tangible proof Ethan and Mrs. Albright desperately needed. They now had physical evidence to support Ethan's chilling echoes and Mrs. Peterson's unease, painting a disturbing picture of manipulation and a potential motive for the deaths. Mr. Davies, driven by a desire to clear opposition to Arthur Jenkins's lucrative zoning development, appeared to be silencing dissent in the most final way possible. The question now was how to present this unfrozen truth without exposing Ethan's extraordinary ability and risking their own safety. Accusing a respected town official and a powerful developer was a dangerous undertaking. Mrs. Albright, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a steely resolve, suggested they approach Sheriff Brody again. This time, they wouldn't rely solely on Ethan's inexplicable senses. They would present the tampered petition as evidence of potential wrongdoing, emphasizing Mrs. Peterson's concerns about Mr. Davies's unusual interest in the original documents. The next morning, Ethan and Mrs. Albright found Sheriff Brody at his office. He listened patiently as Mrs. Albright laid out their findings, carefully avoiding any mention of Ethan's echoes. She focused on Mrs. Peterson's account and presented the signature sheets, pointing out the subtle smudges and the inconsistencies in the ink. Sheriff Brody, initially skeptical, became increasingly concerned as he examined the documents under a magnifying glass that Mrs. Albright had provided. The faint signs of tampering were undeniable, suggesting a deliberate attempt to alter official records. Mrs. Peterson seemed quite troubled by Mr. Davies's behavior, Mrs. Albright explained, her voice firm. And these alterations, it raises serious questions about the integrity of the zoning vote and the potential motives behind it. Ethan, standing quietly beside Mrs. Albright, focused his senses on the sheriff. He detected a flicker of coldness, a faint echo of unease, suggesting that Sheriff Brody was beginning to believe them, or at least, to suspect that something was wrong. Sheriff Brody leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. This is serious. Tampering with official documents, and the timing of these so-called accidents. He looked at Ethan, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. He hadn't dismissed the boy's earlier warnings entirely, they had lingered in the back of his mind. Ethan, Sheriff Brody said slowly, his gaze direct, you said you had feelings about these events. Can you tell me anything else? Ethan hesitated, then took a deep breath. He couldn't fully explain the cold whispers and the frozen touch, but he could offer details that might corroborate the physical evidence. He spoke of the specific locations, the brief images he had seen, careful to present them as strong intuitions rather than supernatural visions. Sheriff Brody listened intently, his initial skepticism replaced by a growing sense of urgency. The tampered petition, combined with Ethan's unsettlingly accurate feelings, painted a disturbing picture. He promised to launch a full investigation, starting with Mr. Davies and his dealings with Arthur Jenkins. The unfrozen truth, though fragile, had finally begun to thaw the wall of disbelief in Willow Creek. The chilling echoes that haunted Ethan's mind might finally lead to justice. Chapter 10: The Treasurer's Alibi. Sheriff Brody, his demeanor now serious and focused, began his investigation swiftly. His first step was to question Mr. Davies. The treasurer, initially indignant at being suspected, maintained a calm and collected facade. He vehemently denied tampering with the petition, claiming his thorough review was simply part of his due diligence. He offered a detailed alibi for the times of each death, alibis that, on the surface, seemed solid. He claimed to have been at home with his wife during Mrs. Gable's supposed accident, attending a town council meeting during Mr. Peterson's, and visiting his sister out of town on the Sunday Reverend Miller drowned. Sheriff Brody, a seasoned investigator, noted the precision of Davies's alibis, almost as if they had been carefully rehearsed. He also questioned Arthur Jenkins, who expressed outrage at the accusations, painting himself as a victim of small-town politics and baseless rumors. Jenkins also offered alibis, seemingly corroborated by business associates. Frustrated by the lack of concrete evidence directly linking Davies or Jenkins to the deaths, Sheriff Brody confided in Mrs. Albright. He admitted that Ethan's unsettling insights in the tampered petition had shaken his initial skepticism, but he needed more than intuition and altered signatures to make an arrest. Ethan, sensing Sheriff Brody's frustration and the lingering coldness that still clung faintly to the town hall, tried to focus his ability. During Sheriff Brody's questioning of Mr. Davies, Ethan had been present, observing the treasurer. He noticed fleeting images accompanying the coldness around Davies, a quick glance towards the lake when Reverend Miller was mentioned, a clenching of his jaw when Mrs. Gable's name was brought up, and a subtle twitch in his hand, the one with the gold ring, when the topic of the zoning petition arose. The raspy whisper was fainter around Davies, almost buried beneath his composed exterior, but Ethan caught snippets, necessary, for progress, no loose ends. Ethan shared these fragmented impressions with Mrs. Albright. "He's hiding something," Ethan insisted. "I can feel it. The coldness. It's like it agrees with the bad things he's saying." Mrs. Albright suggested they focus on corroborating or disproving Davies's alibis. She used her extensive network within Willow Creek to subtly inquire about the treasurer's whereabouts on those specific days. The responses were consistent with Davies's claims, painting a picture of an upstanding citizen with a predictable routine. However, Mrs. Albright uncovered a small discrepancy. While Davies claimed to have been at the town council meeting during Mr. Peterson's death, a few attendees vaguely recalled him leaving early, citing a sudden headache. It was a minor detail easily dismissed, but it planted a seed of doubt in Sheriff Brody's mind. Meanwhile, Ethan, haunted by the image of the gold ring and the "no loose ends" whisper, remembered seeing Mr. Davies near the lake on the Saturday before Reverend Miller's death, claiming he was enjoying a quiet afternoon of fishing. It was a casual encounter, easily forgotten, but now it took on a sinister significance. Davies's alibi of being out of town on Sunday suddenly seemed less airtight. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly beginning to shift, guided by Ethan's chilling senses and Mrs. Albright's quiet persistence. The treasurer's carefully constructed alibi was showing hairline cracks, and the frozen touch that clung to him hinted at a darkness he was desperately trying to conceal. The investigation was far from over, and the truth behind the chilling echoes remained elusive, but the scent of deception was growing stronger in the quiet air of Willow Creek. Chapter 11: The Cracks in the Ice. Sheriff Brody, now convinced that there was more to the deaths than mere accidents, intensified his investigation into Mr. Davies's alibis. The vague recollection of Davies leaving the town council meeting early and Ethan's memory of seeing him at the lake the day before Reverend Miller's drowning provided the first cracks in the treasurer's carefully constructed story. Sheriff Brody revisited the attendees of the council meeting, pressing them for more specific details about Davies's departure. While no one could definitively recall the exact time he left or his stated reason, a few more individuals remembered his hurried demeanor. Meanwhile, Mrs. Albright, using her knowledge of the town's social circles, discreetly inquired about Mr. Davies's sister, whom he claimed to have visited out of town on the Sunday of Reverend Miller's death. She discovered that Davies's sister had been away on a cruise that entire weekend, a fact that directly contradicted his alibi. Armed with this crucial piece of information, Sheriff Brody confronted Mr. Davies again. The treasurer's composure finally began to crumble. He stammered, offering weak excuses and shifting his story, but the lie about his sister was undeniable. As Sheriff Brody pressed him further, Ethan focused his senses on Davies. The coldness around the treasurer intensified, no longer a faint residue but a sharp, biting frost. The raspy whispers became clearer, more agitated. "They're getting closer, need to be careful, cover everything." The urgency in the whispers suggested Davies was aware that the investigation was closing in. Ethan also experienced a more vivid echo, a fleeting image of Mr. Davies's gold-ringed hand pushing something heavy into the dark water of the lake, followed by a look of cold satisfaction on his face. The chilling image solidified Ethan's conviction about Davies's involvement in Reverend Miller's death. Sheriff Brody, sensing Davies's growing desperation and armed with the contradictory alibi, decided to bring Arthur Jenkins in for questioning again. He presented Jenkins with the evidence of the tampered petition and subtly hinted at the inconsistencies in Davies's statements. Jenkins, realizing the walls were closing in, became increasingly nervous and evasive. The pressure began to mount on both Davies and Jenkins. The carefully constructed facade of respectability began to crack under the weight of the investigation and Ethan's chillingly accurate feelings, which Sheriff Brody, though unable to explain, could no longer ignore. The truth, like the unfrozen ground after a long winter, was beginning to surface in Willow Creek, carrying with it the icy breath of betrayal and murder. The final confrontation was drawing near. Chapter 12: The Frozen Confession. The mounting pressure finally caused the carefully constructed ice around Mr. Davies to shatter. Confronted with the undeniable evidence of his false alibi and the increasingly pointed questions from Sheriff Brody, the treasurer's composure crumbled. His denials weakened, replaced by nervous fidgeting and evasive glances. Ethan, present during the tense interrogation, felt the biting frost emanating from Davies intensify. The raspy whispers in his mind became a frantic torrent. It was necessary. They wouldn't understand. Jenkins promised, have to protect it. The fragmented words painted a picture of desperation and a perceived justification for his actions, tied to Arthur Jenkins's promises. Sheriff Brody, sensing the breakthrough, pressed Davies harder, focusing on his relationship with Arthur Jenkins and the benefits he stood to gain from the zoning change. He also subtly alluded to the tampered petition and the silencing of opposition. Finally, the dam broke. Mr. Davies, his face pale and streaked with sweat, confessed. He admitted to altering the petition at Jenkins's behest, ensuring the zoning change would pass without resistance. He then revealed a chilling truth. Jenkins had orchestrated the accidents to eliminate key opponents, Mrs. Gable, Mr. Peterson, and Reverend Miller, and Davies had provided Jenkins with crucial information about their routines and vulnerabilities. The balancing of accounts wasn't about ledgers, it was about eliminating those who stood in their way. As Davies confessed, Ethan experienced a final, vivid echo. He saw a clear image of Davies's gold-ringed hand pushing Reverend Miller beneath the surface of the lake, a look of cold calculation on his face, followed by the satisfied, chilling whisper, "Peace at last." The frozen touch that had haunted Ethan was finally explained. It was the psychic residue of the killer's cold intent. Arthur Jenkins, realizing his accomplice had confessed, also broke under pressure, corroborating Davies's account. The seemingly peaceful town of Willow Creek was revealed to harbor a dark conspiracy, driven by greed and a ruthless desire for power. In the aftermath, a heavy silence fell over Willow Creek, the idyllic facade shattered. Grief mixed with disbelief and anger as the truth of the accidents came to light. Mr. Davies and Arthur Jenkins were arrested, their betrayal leaving a deep scar on the community. Ethan, the boy who felt the frozen touch and heard the chilling whispers, found a strange sense of quiet amidst the turmoil. The burden of his secret was lighter now, the darkness he had sensed finally brought into the light. The unfrozen truth had brought justice, but the chilling echoes of the past would forever linger in the quiet corners of his mind, a constant reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath the most peaceful surfaces. The case was closed, but the understanding of his unique and unsettling gift and its role in uncovering the truth would stay with Ethan, a frozen memory in the thawing landscape of Willow Creek. The journey to unveil the dark secrets of Willow Creek has reached its end. Ethan, the boy with the strange senses, has confronted fear and the harsh truth about the hidden killer. Though the darkness has been pushed back, the cold residues and malevolent whispers will forever be etched in the town's memory. Thank you for joining Ethan on his quest for justice. We hope this story has delivered suspenseful moments and profound reflections on the evil lurking beneath a seemingly ordinary facade. If you enjoyed this story and wish to support future works, please don't forget to like, share, and follow the page. Your support is the greatest motivation. See you in other thrilling tales.